In the depths of human relationships lies something more than just luck or chance. If every person who enters our lives and touches our emotional sphere is meant for something greater than what initially meets the eye, then love ceases to be a mere coincidence. In the teachings of Carl Jung, love, especially that which causes turmoil, pain, or even obsession, appears as a psychic mirror. It's not a simple reflection, but rather a revelation of those parts of ourselves that we prefer to ignore, suppress, or have not yet realized. This is how the shadow manifests, a key concept in Jungian psychology. Everything that an individual does not acknowledge within themselves is projected onto others, especially those who evoke strong emotions, awaken insecurities, provoke a need for control or a desire to escape. Love that arises unexpectedly often comes disguised as an opportunity, but in reality it is a call from the unconscious. It's a kind of uncomfortable teacher who speaks not with words but through reactions, wounds, and recurring behavioral patterns. When fate brings us together with someone who seems to touch the most painful strings of our soul, it is not an act of destruction, but rather an indication of old wounds that we have tried to ignore. As Jung wisely noted, enlightenment comes not through dreams of light, but through the awareness of our own darkness. In the context of love, this darkness often manifests as emotional dependence, fear of rejection, an acute need for validation, or an inexplicable attraction to emotionally unavailable partners. It is no coincidence when our heart is drawn to someone who does not reciprocate. It is also no coincidence that we repeatedly find ourselves in relationships that leave only a sense of emptiness and disappointment. Behind this lies a certain pattern, a stable pattern that cannot be broken by external love, no matter how strong it may be. The key to healing lies in greater inner awareness. Love does not fill our inner voids, it only brings them to the surface, exposing them to us. Imagine that every person you have ever loved is a reflection of a certain part of your own personality, not in a literal, but in a symbolic sense. A cold and detached partner, incapable of expressing emotions, may reflect your own insecurity and fear of vulnerability. A person who seeks to control your every move may be a mirror image of your own need to control your feelings and emotions. Even someone who seemed perfect and then betrayed you may indicate your propensity for idealization, your habit of placing too much hope in others, your inability to support yourself independently without dissolving into another person. We attract certain people into our lives not as punishment or retribution for past sins, but because they are on the same energetic, emotional, and psychological level as our own unresolved internal conflicts. Relationships are not just emotional connections, they are complex scenarios in which our unconscious gets the opportunity to speak out, and it does so loudly and insistently. When a turbulent relationship leaves a person in confusion, the primary question should not be directed at finding fault in the partner's actions, but at self-analysis. What internal reasons allowed this to happen? What lesson is hidden in this experience? And what does the soul wound say? It is much easier to shift responsibility to another, branding them a narcissist or egoist, than to look inside oneself. However, as long as a person continues to blame external factors, they are doomed to repeat the same scenarios in relationships. Faces and names change, but the essence remains the same, as unhealed soul wounds will be experienced again and again until the necessary lesson is learned. As Jung insightfully noted, any relationship is a kind of initiation. Not all people are meant to stay in a person's life forever, but each of them appears with a specific purpose, to teach something. Some show what a person deserves, others what they are willing to endure. Some elevate, others break, but even in pain and chaos lies wisdom and messages of the soul. Most people prefer not to notice that behind every strong attraction and romantic obsession lies an echo of personal history, demanding attention. Often, a person clings to another not out of true love, but because their wound recognizes a kindred spirit in someone else's pain. This is not fate, but merely a personified fragment of their own shadow, which they begin to indulge, justify, and idealize instead of confronting. When a person faces a situation that awakens their deepest fears, The natural reaction may be a desire to run, to hide from unpleasant sensations. Instead of succumbing to the instinct of self-preservation, it's far more beneficial to pause and listen attentively to yourself. It's important to observe your body's reactions. Does it tense up, or does despair paralyze it? Does an overwhelming desire arise for someone else to constantly reassure and support you? These reactions aren't a reflection of the external world, but rather a mirror of your internal state. The paradox lies in the fact that the deeper one's self-awareness, the more profoundly their romantic relationships change. It's not that better people suddenly appear, but that the individual ceases to respond to what they once mistook for love, which was merely a manifestation of need. They no longer confuse intense emotions with genuine intimacy, control with responsibility, or anxiety with desire. One learns to see the essence, not just the surface appearance, and most importantly, gains the ability to say no in situations where they previously remained silent out of fear of loss. However, to reach this state, one must traverse the thorny path of self-discovery, muster the courage to look at the past without self-pity, peer within oneself without judgment, and stride into the future without illusions. True love, the kind that isn't based on need or dependence, isn't something to be found in the external world. It's born and built within oneself. Only by learning to love one's flaws and accept one's broken parts does one stop seeking someone to fix them. Deep within human nature, in the hidden corners of the soul, a subtle process of selection takes place. Subconsciously, imperceptibly, an internal force determines whom to gaze upon, to whom to open the doors of the heart, to whom to entrust one's deepest feelings. And this decision is made not by the rational mind, but by an ancient, instinctive part of the personality, holding the burden of the past, unhealed wounds, genetic memory, internalized beliefs and hidden hopes, long before the concept of love is even understood. This is what Carl Jung spoke of, emphasizing that unconscious motives govern a person's life, determining their fate. The harsh truth is that the responsibility for emotional preferences lies within the individual, in the depths of their subconscious, which they are reluctant to explore. Many are inclined to explain infatuation by shared interests, predestination, or chance coincidence. However, attraction often arises towards those who possess qualities that the individual lacks, those they dream of becoming, or those they fear confronting. Love ignites towards the freedom one deprives oneself of, the power one denies within, the abandonment one has already experienced, the unhealed wound. The other person appears as a living symbol of an unresolved conflict, and what is called love turns out to be a complex dance of mutual needs, where every gesture, every word, and even silence is filled with deep emotional meaning. For instance, another person's confidence is attractive because it compensates for one's own doubts and insecurities. A partner's independence evokes admiration because one neglects their own needs. Detachment draws attention because deep down there's an unspoken story that love must be earned, not taken for granted. In everyone's life there are people who seem destined, those who penetrate the very essence of the soul, stirring up a storm of emotions and becoming an integral part of existence. However, behind this apparent idyll often lies a bitter truth. Such intensity of feelings doesn't always indicate true love. Sometimes it's merely a disguised trauma, an echo of a painful past, a familiar pattern for a wounded nervous system. What's habitual, even if it causes suffering, is subconsciously perceived as familiar because deep down the individual seeks not a partner but an emotional experience ingrained in early childhood. If a person has learned since childhood that love is unpredictability, they will be irresistibly drawn to unstable relationships. If love is associated with pain, they will desperately cling to those who cause them suffering. And all this happens on a subconscious level, outside the zone of control, because decisions are made not by reason, but by traumatized experience. In this context, inner work on oneself becomes vital. It's not about avoiding love or emotional detachment, but about recognizing the part of the personality that determines the choice of partner. Who makes the decision? The mature and conscious I, knowing its worth and deserving the best, or the traumatized child, desperately needing rescue, recognition, and unconditional love. When the child makes the choice, love turns into a plea. When the adult makes the choice, love becomes a conscious decision, not a life necessity. However, to reach such a level of awareness, one must go through all their masks and illusions, look with ruthless honesty at their attachments, and admit that often the partner was not cruel but only placed on a pedestal they did not deserve. Acknowledging one's own idealization, ignoring warning signs, being satisfied with crumbs of attention, and substituting love is extremely painful, but at the same time liberating. Accepting one's role in what happened restores lost power, allows one to see love not as something that happens by itself, but as a result of joint efforts, conscious choice, and mutual creation. The style of communication changes, healthy boundaries are established, and a new perspective on the partner is formed. There is no longer a need for constant confirmation of feelings, for searching for someone who will fix and complete you. A person becomes a self-sufficient emotional space, and love ceases to be a roller coaster, turning into a solid bridge connecting two hearts. However, the intensity of love not only does not weaken, but also acquires new facets of reality, sincerity, and humanity. This happens because its roots move away from fear and grow from a genuine meeting, mutual recognition of two personalities. These people do not need each other for mere survival, but consciously choose a joint path, which becomes possible only when a person stops seeking salvation in another's soul and begins to radiate healing energy. The quality of love a person experiences directly depends on their internal relationship with themselves. Self-esteem, personal boundaries, and the ability to enjoy solitude without feeling lost all reflect how love enters their life. As Jung astutely noted, love is not blind, it has the gift of deep penetration, exposing hidden aspects of personality. Love does not come to fill voids, but to point out their existence. It does not give ready-made answers, but highlights questions that a person has diligently avoided for years. It is at this moment that many retreat, as conscious love requires emotional maturity, a rejection of the illusion that someone will come and complete them. It requires leaving aside naive romanticism and accepting a deeper truth. True love begins where need ends. When a person is capable of maintaining themselves in a state of wholeness, they open themselves to love that is not a reflection of their internal voids, but becomes an extension of their essence. At times, indulging in romantic dreams, we tend to see love as a game of chance, a happy coincidence, or a generous gift of fate. However, the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung urges us to penetrate behind this captivating veil. With disarming directness, he asserts that the love we attract into our lives is a mirror reflection not of our desires, but of our very essence, the innermost depths of our soul. And this, despite all its poetic quality, is alarming. After all, if the love we encounter is marked by dishonesty, indifference, insults, or inconstancy, what does this say about ourselves? This is not about guilt, but about the degree of awareness. No one strives for suffering, but many unconsciously choose those who already know how to inflict pain because it seems familiar, in tune with the internal narrative that we have been playing in our heads for years, like a worn-out record, even though it hurts us to admit it. Observing the recurring scenarios in our relationships, we notice certain echoes of the past, echoes of previous connections, similar types appearing before us under different masks. Situations change, the scenery is updated, but the emotional core remains the same. And it is in this invisible space between the thirst for happiness and inevitable pain that the true reason for what we attract into our lives lies. We attract what we consider ourselves worthy of, even if this belief is hidden from our consciousness. We radiate energy that is formed in moments of solitude, in our internal dialogues, in ways of filling emotional emptiness, and in the degree of self-acceptance. Another person, in essence, only responds to the silent call emanating from the depths of our being. Some people, sometimes unknowingly, seem to attract turbulent and unstable relationships. And this is not about a conscious search for drama, but rather about an insufficient understanding of themselves an inability to protect themselves from what destructively affects their inner world. This is the main secret. The nature of the love attracted is a reflection of the depth of self-knowledge. It is not about external attractiveness, sharpness of mind, or even generosity of spirit, but about the emotional wave that a person radiates, about what their subconscious accepts as a matter of course, about the unspoken stories living in the depths of their soul. In this context, love is not merely a connection between two people, but a powerful tool for self-discovery, a way for life itself to point out its own boundaries and vulnerabilities. The partner becomes a stage of sorts, where long-standing emotional traumas are played out. This is why love is often accompanied by fear, a desperate desire to possess, and painful dependence. People love not out of a sense of inner harmony and self-sufficiency, but out of acute need, out of the illusory hope that another can heal a wound they are not even able to recognize. However, love cannot cure what one is not ready to face openly. The most it can do is shake things up, expose the problem, and put it on display. Then one is faced with a choice: to use this mirror to see one's true self, or to break it in an attempt to avoid the painful truth. It is widely believed that love forgives all, that the pain it causes is evidence of its depth, and that its all-consuming nature is evidence of its authenticity. However, Jung held a different view. For him, true love does not destroy the individual, but rather contributes to their integration and wholeness. It does not leave one in ruins, but encourages self-improvement. Wholeness, according to Jung, implies awareness not only of the bright sides of the personality, but also of its dark sides: jealousy, fears, the desire for control, and insecurity. Love exposes both the best qualities and the hidden aspects, which, instead of being a tragedy, can become a valuable opportunity. It is a chance to turn the unconscious into the conscious, to turn relationships into a path of self-discovery, to use them not as a refuge, but as a school of life. However, this approach requires courage. When one realizes that the love they attract is not a coincidence but a reflection of their inner world, they can no longer shift the blame onto others or run away from themselves. It is necessary to stop and look within. Which part of the personality chose to remain in the shadows? Which part felt comfortable in the absence of attention? Which part believed that it did not deserve more? These questions are complex but necessary, as the answers are not in the external world, but within oneself. Until self-work is done, one will continue to attract the same type of love. Names, appearances, and promises may change, but the essence will remain the same, as the script will not change. This script can only be rewritten through a sincere and deep exploration of one's emotional history, childhood, primary connections, and beliefs about love. It is there that behavioral patterns are formed. Until one returns to the origins, they will continue to repeat the same melody, even if they change the song. The love one attracts is not a simple coincidence, but a carefully crafted message that their subconscious sends into the universe, often without their knowledge. Each interaction reveals certain aspects of the personality, perhaps those that one does not wish to see in themselves. These aspects require acceptance and love, first and foremost, from oneself. It is impossible to receive the love that one denies oneself. It is impossible to earn respect without placing oneself in a worthy position, and it is impossible to get rid of the past if one is not ready to let it go. Love is not magic, but revelation, a subtle and accurate mirror. When one learns to look into this mirror without fear, it will cease to reflect need and begin to reflect presence and truth. Observing the manifestation of love without trying to impress, when the game of seduction fades into the background and only authenticity remains, becomes a profound revelation. At this point, where love ceases to be a promise and turns into a daily action, the true emotional structure of a person is revealed. Carl Jung argued that there is no more direct way to know the soul of a person than through the prism of the love they are capable of maintaining. It is important not only whom one chooses to love, but also how they do it, from what motives, and with what internal challenges they are willing to face for the sake of that love. In the search for relief from the oppressive feeling of inner emptiness and doubts about their own worth, individuals often see love as a panacea. They tend to project an idealized image onto their chosen one, perceiving them as a savior capable of filling the gaping holes in their soul. However, as the famous psychologist Jung warned, such a projection is far from true love, being merely an illusory mirage, hiding under the guise of passionate desire, a banal exploitation. When one loves not for the genuine qualities of the partner, but for the role that they are meant to play in their life, it is not about love, but about exploitation. And although this form of relationship is quite common in society, it inevitably leads to disappointment, since no mortal is capable of eternally bearing the unbearable burden of someone else's salvation. Herein lies another inconvenient truth. The love we attract into our lives is determined not by our conscious preferences, but by the deep-seated needs of our unconscious. We are instinctively drawn to those who, without realizing it, perfectly align with our unhealed wounds. Often this means being attracted to an emotionally unavailable person, as the individual themselves has learned to build barriers, avoiding full engagement in relationships. Or a person falls in love with someone who does not reciprocate their feelings, because, at a deep level, they do not choose themselves. Thus, love becomes a symbolic battlefield, where secret desires clash with painful traumas, the longing for intimacy with the fear of losing control. When an individual achieves harmony with themselves, their way of expressing love undergoes a radical transformation. They no longer seek validation of their own significance, do not feel the need to control their partner, and do not allow themselves to be manipulated. Their love stems from a sense of inner freedom, not from a desperate need. They are not intrusive, do not resort to manipulation, and do not demand constant proof of feelings, because they realize that love is not a power struggle, but a union of two whole individuals, not an attempt to unite two deficient halves. Thus, the more diligently a person works on themselves, the more mature and healthy relationships they attract into their lives. They stop looking in other people for mere reflections of their own traumas and begin to find common ground with those who openly admit their shortcomings without trying to hide them. This process of self-improvement does not always follow a straight path. At times it seems that healing has already been achieved, but the person is once again drawn into old patterns of behavior. This happens because the subconscious is in no hurry to reveal its secrets, protecting itself and subjecting the personality to tests. Each new relationship provides an opportunity to see one's own shortcomings and needs more clearly. It is important to ask oneself not only what is lacking in the partner, but also what the person refuses to give themselves. There is no more dangerous connection than one that is based on the illusory hope that another person will come and correct the mistakes of the past. This hope, despite its attractiveness, is destructive because it turns love into an obligation. Love based on a sense of duty ultimately becomes an act of survival, not a manifestation of fullness and happiness. Carl Jung viewed individuation as a complex process of becoming a whole person, where reunification with all aspects of the self takes place. This journey involves accepting both socially approved traits and those that are carefully hidden from outsiders and even from oneself. In this context, love is not an end in itself, but a fertile ground that promotes the disclosure of non-integrated parts of the personality. Love makes a person defenseless, prompting them to remove protective barriers and open their inner world to another. In this emotional exposure, unhealed emotional wounds manifest themselves. It is no coincidence that people who avoid love are often most afraid of facing themselves. They subconsciously understand that true love implies a demonstration of the soul, not a showy personality or ego. By analyzing the type of love that a person attracts into their life, they carry out a deep self-knowledge, observing themselves in a mirror of ultimate honesty. This process can be painful, but it can also bring liberation, revealing hidden aspects of the personality. A person faces their limitations, contradictions, and implicit attachments, but also gets the opportunity to change their life, heal, and break the vicious cycle. Once a destructive pattern of behavior becomes obvious, it is impossible to ignore it any longer. There is a chance, albeit one that requires considerable courage, to choose a different path. It is at this stage that love ceases to be an accident and becomes a conscious choice. A person begins to love not out of hunger or need, but out of the fullness of their own being. The choice of a partner does not come from an inner void, but from a clear understanding of oneself and one's needs. Attracting love becomes not an attempt to fill a gaping hole, but a desire to share one's inner wealth. However, in order to reach this state, it is necessary to go through trials, through the discomfort of self-analysis, and through the courage to admit one's own mistakes. It is necessary to admit that one has also caused pain to others, made the wrong choices, and allowed more into one's life than should have been allowed. After all, the love that a person attracts is not just a story of relationships with another person, it is a silent language in which their soul speaks to itself. To assert that everyone deserves all-encompassing, mature and conscious love has become a kind of incantation, a secret desire that people repeat to themselves. Instead of naively expecting a miracle, it's worth asking the question posed by psychologist Carl Jung: what kind of love can a person withstand? Attracting what you desire is only part of the journey. It's much more difficult to hold on to it, to accept the challenge that love throws at the inner world, and not destroy it when it touches the most painful and vulnerable chords of the soul. True love is not just a reflection of romantic fantasies, but the result of painstaking inner work by both partners, striving not to use each other to fill their own emotional voids. Sometimes the attraction turns out to be powerful, but painful. It absorbs, exhausts, and becomes obsessive. Such a connection is mistaken for passion and all-consuming love, without realizing that suffering is hidden behind the mask of strong feelings. Carl Jung offered an explanation according to which turbulent and all-consuming relationships often arise due to the powerful influence of projections of the anima or animus, deep images that represent the feminine or masculine unconscious in our psyche. When we meet a person who, as we think, embodies these archetypal figures, we experience an irresistible, almost magical attraction. However, as Jung argued, at this moment we do not see the person themselves, but only a reflection of a part of ourselves projected into the external world. In other words, we fall in love not with a real person, but with the idealized image that we ourselves created in our imagination. The inevitable destruction of this image leads to deep disappointment and devastation. But this pain is caused not so much by the loss of another person, but by the collapse of the fantasy we created. That is why, when a partner leaves us or the relationship ends, we feel as if something that belonged to us by right has been taken away. But the point is not that this person was really our property, but that we endowed them with a certain emotional role that we considered vital for ourselves. And the pain arises not so much from their departure, but from the realization that we will again have to face the feelings and experiences that this person helped us hide inside ourselves: loneliness, fear, insecurity, and others. As Carl Jung keenly observed, everything that a person leaves unattended in the depths of their consciousness inexorably shapes their life path. In the realm of love relationships, this manifests itself in the form of repeating scenarios, different partners, but the same painful experiences, until a person decides to look inside themselves and understand the reasons for these repetitions. The love that comes into life when a person begins to awaken, heal, and question their former beliefs is radically different from previous experiences. It is no longer built on empty promises or unrealistic expectations. There is no longer a need for someone to complete you because there is an awareness of your own integrity. There is no need for a savior, as the person themselves has learned to cope with difficulties. This new inner state transforms the energy that a person radiates and accordingly attracts a completely different type of love. This is love that does not require wearing masks or participating in games. It does not depend on external approval or the desire for control. This is love that is simply allowed to be. However, even such a healthy and harmonious love can initially cause discomfort. After all, It is no longer fueled by the adrenaline of drama, but is based on calm and peace. For those who are used to chaotic relationships, this tranquility can feel like emptiness. They mistakenly take serenity for boredom and maturity for a lack of emotion. And often such people subconsciously destroy these healthy connections because they do not know how to accept love that does not activate their anxiety system, does not force them to be in a state of constant emotional readiness. Carl Jung deeply understood that even habitual suffering can seem like a more reliable refuge than the unexplored expanses. That is why the inner work of a person consists not only in healing emotional wounds, but also in mastering the art of accepting love without a mixture of fear. Observing someone who has gone through this thorny path can produce the deepest transformation. Such a person no longer succumbs to impulsive urges of pursuit, flight, or idealization. They love consciously, standing firmly on the ground and with a soul open to the world. They realize that love is not always perfect, but it is in these imperfections, permeated with awareness, that unique beauty lies. They do not seek to remake another person and do not dissolve in them to the point of losing their own identity. They find a harmonious balance between the personal I and the common we, and on this solid foundation, they build relationships based on patience, sincerity, and humanity. When a person reaches this cherished point, love ceases to be an obsession and turns into a conscious choice. Every day, he chooses to be present, chooses another person but doesn't forget to choose himself. This choice isn't made because it's easy, but because he's come to understand that the deepest love respects the other person's freedom, not perceiving it as a threat. This becomes possible only when a person stops living in constant fear of rejection, of not being good enough, or of being alone. After all, the love we attract into our lives is directly related to how we treat ourselves. And these relationships, hidden from prying eyes, speak more about us than any words. There is no magic algorithm, no predetermined stages, or clear time frames for achieving this goal. It's a deeply personal, intimate process that often requires solitude and self-reflection. However, every time a person decides to look at themselves without embellishment, when they bravely confront the aspects of their personality that they previously tried to ignore, they take another confident step towards being able to love truly, from the heart. And then when you least expect it, a person appears in your life who doesn't seek to save you from all troubles, but offers to share the journey, not as a final destination, but as a faithful companion. This love, perhaps not flashy or promising riches, transforms not so much by what it gives, but by what it awakens within. A turning point arrives when you realize that the type of love you attract into your life is not accidental. This revelation doesn't always come in silence and calm. Often it bursts into life like an emotional storm, when relationships that seemed significant and strong suddenly crumble, or when a person repeatedly makes the same mistakes, not understanding their cause. It is in such moments that the mirror of illusions shatters, and one begins to see the true motives behind their choices. Carl Jung put forward the thesis that we attract into our lives not what we strive for, but what constitutes our essence. This idea, however uncomfortable it may seem, encourages us to turn our gaze inward into the most painful corners of the soul. Behind every failed love story, behind every relationship that diminishes dignity, behind every sacrificial giving that leaves a feeling of emptiness, lies an unspoken story about the relationship with oneself, about the part of the personality that one stubbornly avoids. This could be an inner child deprived of attention, a teenager who has learned silence as a way to earn love, or an adult who is still seeking approval in the eyes of others. When this inner story remains unacknowledged, when it slumbers in the depths of the subconscious, it begins to be projected onto those around us, especially those to whom we feel an overwhelming attraction. These people seem to awaken something primal, instinctive, demanding immediate gratification. However, this sudden fire of passion is not always evidence of compatibility. Often it is merely a symptom of a soul wound longing to heal. Jung viewed relationships as a stage on which the drama of the soul unfolds, where it reveals itself, is reflected and confronts itself. It is impossible to achieve genuine intimacy without confronting one's own inner demons, and sometimes love becomes a painful process precisely because it activates those parts of the personality that one has carefully suppressed: jealousy, insecurity, fear of rejection, the need for control or submission. All that one would like to hide from prying eyes bursts out in the realm of love relationships. And if a person is not ready to face the truth, they will repeat the same scenario over and over again. And so one asks, why are they attracted to those who are inaccessible? Why does their heart yearn for someone who does not reciprocate? Why do healthy relationships seem like an impossible task? And the truth rarely lies on the surface. It is hidden in the depths of the subconscious, where beliefs accepted without critical reflection have taken root. Perhaps one has learned that love is inextricably linked to suffering, that it must be earned, that it requires self-sacrifice. Perhaps one has subconsciously linked strong feelings with turmoil, distance with attraction, and aloofness with mystery. And, without realizing it, these invisible settings dictate their emotional choices. The most difficult task is not to attract into your life a person capable of sincere and healthy love, but to feel worthy of that love. After all, without deep inner work, healthy relationships may seem alien and incomprehensible. And then, against logic, one begins to push away, sabotage, erect barriers, as if their emotional system doesn't know how to react to something that isn't built on deficit and suffering. According to Jung, the human soul needs the clash of opposites for its development and improvement. It is in this crucible of contradictions, where the departing struggles with the emerging, that genuine personal transformation occurs. However, everyone must walk this path of self-knowledge and transformation alone. One can study the works of thinkers, listen to the advice of the wise, indulge in deep reflections, but at a certain point, it becomes necessary to be alone with oneself in silence and ask oneself key questions. What is it that a person is really looking for in another? Sincere love, or just a painkiller for emotional wounds? A genuine connection or confirmation of one's own importance for an inflated ego? Just company? Or a refuge to avoid facing one's loneliness? The answers to these questions do not come instantly. They arise gradually, like shards of a broken mirror. Sometimes they manifest as sudden memories. Sometimes they pour out as a stream of tears that one did not even suspect existed. But sooner or later, the answers come. And when this happens, clarity dawns in the mind. A person stops looking for a lifeline in love and begins to see it as an opportunity to expand their inner world. They no longer dissolve into the eyes of another, expecting them to return their lost identity, because they already know who they really are. And from that moment, everything changes. The principles of choice, the limits of tolerance, the measure of generosity and permissibility. A person begins to live consciously, in harmony with themselves and the world around them. At first, the path to healing may cause a feeling of isolation as one ceases to conform to familiar patterns of interaction. However, this loneliness is not a punishment, but rather a period of purification and preparation for more authentic relationships. When true love knocks on the door, it will not be perfect and will not get rid of internal problems. It will become an invitation to conscious forward movement, to a generous exchange based on abundance, not need. A person will see a whole person in their partner, not a project to be fixed. It is important not only who a person attracts into their life, but also what position they occupy in the relationship. No longer out of need, but out of presence, not to fill a void, but to celebrate the meeting of two souls. At this level, love ceases to be a spectacle or a drama. It acquires depth, tenderness, and courage. This is supporting another without forgetting to support oneself. Such love becomes possible only when a person stops acting on autopilot and begins to choose with a heart awakened to the truth. After all, the love that a person attracts will always be a mirror reflecting their inner world. The question is whether they are ready to see this reflection. Carl Jung, asserting the impossibility of achieving enlightenment through contemplation of bright images, but only through awareness of one's own darkness, touched not only on aspects of personal healing, but also spoke about the very essence of love, the environment where it originates and strengthens. True love takes root not on the ostentatious facade of our personality facing the world, but in the innermost depths where our unspoken fears, denied qualities, and what we carefully protect from prying eyes are hidden. It is in this hidden corner that the true nature of a person begins to unfold, determined by the type of love they attract into their life. Perhaps in the past a person experienced feelings of incredible strength, the intensity of which still remains a mystery to them. Perhaps they gave themselves completely, sacrificing even those parts of their personality that should have been preserved. Perhaps they experienced periods of despair, showed generosity, made excuses, built castles in the air to the point of exhaustion, and now, looking back, they wonder how they could have reached such a state. However, following Jung's ideas, one can realize that any relationship is a reflection of the primary connection that a person has with themselves. This is not about self-flagellation and searching for the guilty, but about honest and impartial observation of oneself. What part of their inner I sincerely believed that this was true love? In the depths of many people lies an unhealed emotional trauma, silently calling for the unconditional love that they lacked so much in the past. This wound becomes a kind of radar, unfailingly directing them to those who cause pain but seem painfully familiar. As a result, a person finds themselves drawn into a vicious circle. They pursue those who reject them, idealize those who do not notice them, and passionately desire those who do not intend to stay. In this unconscious repetition of traumatic experience lies a childish, naive hope that this time everything will turn out differently. But a miracle will not happen until a person realizes that another person appears in their life not to fill an internal void, but to point to their own incompleteness. That's the hidden beauty of love. Even when it fails, it accomplishes something important. It reveals a person, exposes their dark sides, teaches them to set boundaries, and identifies destructive behavioral patterns. Every relationship leaves its mark, but each mark can be turned into a valuable lesson in awareness if one is willing to look at it with deep understanding. Questions like, why am I attracted to cold people? Why do I get into hopeless relationships? Why do I run away when someone genuinely loves me? Are not about finding fault, but a call to awaken. Awakening, one realizes that the love they deserve will not come to save them from inner emptiness. It will only find them when they reconcile with themselves. As long as one runs from loneliness, from silence, from the truth about themselves, they will only attract the kind of love that confirms their negative beliefs. I'm not good enough. I have to try my best. I have to wait. I have to settle for less. However, all this is just a mirage built on the shaky foundation of wounded pride, and true feeling, unlike deceptive dreams, grows in the present moment, in conscious presence. As Jung perceptively noted, the unconscious aspects of our personality are fatally projected onto our life path. In love relationships, this fatal pattern manifests as a recurring cycle: initial attraction, dizzying euphoria, bitter disappointment, and finally, a crushing emptiness. This vicious circle will continue until one stops, until they stop looking for answers in the external world and turn their gaze inward. That's where the starting point for genuine change lies. By healing, one transforms their energy, which in turn leads to a change in the type of people they allow into their lives. There is no longer a need to attract partners out of a sense of lack, out of emotional deficit. Now the attraction comes from inner abundance, from the fullness of self-sufficiency. This is felt on a deep level, it is noticeable to others, it is a completely different way of being. However, one shouldn't expect instant magic. Healing is a lengthy process, including nights full of doubts, periods of agonizing loneliness, possible relapses, and nostalgia for the past. But all this is an integral part of the journey. It is impossible to know true love without looking into one's own abyss. It is impossible to support others without learning to support oneself. One cannot sincerely say, I choose you out of freedom, if one has not first made a choice in favor of themselves with all their strengths and weaknesses, with their wounds and their strength. When the desired day of love arrives, one should not strive for perfect feelings, but rather their authenticity, sincerity, mutual respect and openness, where there is no room for masks and pretense. To make this possible, it is necessary to shed all the masks that have ever been used in the pursuit of love. Love is not a theatrical stage with learned roles, but a sacred temple where two souls meet, ready to see each other without embellishment and allow themselves to be seen. The most valuable thing in love is not the partner's actions, but what it awakens within us, what feelings and emotions it activates, what doubts it causes, and how it transforms the personality. Love becomes a gateway to the most secret corners of the human soul. Passing through them with an open heart, one realizes that every relationship carries a certain lesson, a message, a reflection. Some relationships expose our shadows, others highlight our virtues, but all of them bring us closer to understanding ourselves. Perhaps this is the ultimate goal of love. Ultimately, what matters is not the frequency of heart wounds, but the number of times one has found the strength to return to themselves, not to close off from the world, to continue to love without losing their own identity. The love that one attracts into their life appears not as a coincidence, but as a natural reflection of their inner world. It is an echo of the state of mind, derived from beliefs, past traumas, emotional baggage, and the degree of self-awareness. The love attracted serves as a mirror, reflecting the essence of a person at the moment, but also indicating the potential for their further development. Any relationship, even marked by pain and disappointment, contains the seed of positive change, capable of pushing towards the revelation of a more authentic, free, and conscious version of oneself. Embarking on this path entails irreversible internal transformations. Love, this mysterious force, is beyond logic and rational measurement. It originates in the depths of the human being, in its primordial and intimate essence. As Carl Jung noted, love not only connects two people, but also brings to the surface the most hidden corners of their souls. A deep connection inevitably leads to transformation. Each time a person opens up to love, they unlock a door to the unknown, to something greater than themselves. There are individuals who enter our lives with deceptive allure, yet with remarkable precision, they touch upon our deepest and most ingrained complexes. This is not a coincidence, but rather a manifestation of synchronicity, a symbolic language of the unconscious, indicating the need for further self-improvement. Perhaps each of us has wondered why we are constantly surrounded by emotionally unavailable people, or why unconditional love evokes fear. And while this may seem unfair, the root of the problem lies not in others, but in our inner world. Carl Jung, in his works, spoke of anima and animus, internal archetypes of the feminine and masculine soul, present in every person. These images, shaped by experience and culture, have a tremendous impact on the choice of a partner. It's not just about tastes or compatibility, but about unconscious projection. A person tends to see in another what they lack in themselves, idealizes, creates dreams and images, and then suffers when these illusions crumble. After all, these images were never real. They merely reflected a part of oneself that needed recognition and acceptance. It is with the acceptance of this truth that the true spiritual journey begins. Love transforms, ceasing to be an arena for battles or a vital need, turning into an instrument of self-analysis and spiritual growth. A person asks themselves important questions. Why is there a need to seek confirmation of one's worth in the external world? Why is the true feeling of love replaced by simple intensity of emotions? What makes one fear appearing before others as they truly are? And each answer found becomes a seed of liberation from internal shackles. This does not mean that pain will disappear without a trace, but it will lose its power over the person. There is no longer a need to seek someone who will fill the inner void, because there is acceptance of this void, its awareness, and the elimination of fear of it. However, such an awakening is not an easy process. Often, To gain clarity, it is necessary to reach the lowest point in a relationship. Sometimes it is necessary to experience a feeling of abandonment, betrayal, or indifference in order to realize that throughout life, a person has been rejecting themselves. And although this may cause great pain, it is this experience that can become a turning point, radically changing everything. The love that everyone deserves does not require self-sacrifice, the abandonment of one's essence, or the destruction of personality to meet someone else's expectations. The love that a person deserves begins at the moment when they stop begging for what should have been given to them by right, respect, attention, and honesty. Carl Jung deeply believed that the most terrible trial for a person is not a meeting with the external world or other people, but with themselves. This is the essence of true love, which acts as a ruthless mirror reflecting all aspects of the personality. It exposes internal contradictions, the bleeding wounds of the past, and fears carefully masked under the guise of pride. But love also reveals the boundless potential for recovery and growth. If a person is capable of loving while experiencing pain, then one can imagine the power of love born from awareness and understanding. Looking back, it becomes clear that every person who appeared in life left their mark, whether it was a valuable lesson, an important reflection, or a serious challenge. Some taught how to set boundaries, others how to show tenderness. Some awakened to a new life, while others, on the contrary, destroyed the old foundations to give the opportunity to be reborn. And this is also a manifestation of love, albeit not always obvious. It is such experiences that encourage self-knowledge, self-care, the ability to listen to one's inner voice, returning to oneself. When this return occurs, love transforms. There is no longer a need to hold someone nearby, to be content with little, or to seek thrills in drama. The inner world has matured, the emotional bottom has been reached, and now it is possible to build strong, albeit not ideal, but real relationships based on presence, honesty, and the ability to tell the truth, admitting, this is me and this is not for me. This radically transforms what a person attracts into their life. When a person puts themselves first, the world around them begins to reflect this choice. There is no longer a desire for all-consuming intensity, but a need for a connection that inspires and elevates. Instead of idealization comes observation, instead of pursuit, harmony and balance. Love becomes a sacred space where there is no room for perfection, but truth reigns, where everyone can be themselves without fear of judgment. Another person is also free from masks and games, demonstrating maturity based on the understanding that love is an act of courage and freedom. It is then that everything falls into place, when you realize that the love a person attracts does not depend on luck or blind fate. It is a reflection of the inner world, wounds, choices made, and willingness for personal growth. Every love, even one that ends in tears, brings with it a lesson, opening eyes to what was previously unnoticed. This is the real magic, not a fairy tale, but a spiritual one, awakening the soul. When this awareness comes, the need for accusations and repetitions of mistakes disappears. A person stops getting lost in relationships that do not bring support and begins to move forward with a new consciousness, more complete, awakened, and worthy. The understanding that true love is not a desperate search, but a natural consequence of inner development becomes obvious. In this process, every step is important, even those taken in the dark. At this stage of our study, we do not put an end to it, but only move on to a new stage of searching. The psychological legacy of Carl Jung convinces us that the meaning of life lies not in finding ready-made answers, but in the courage to ask questions that penetrate to the very essence of things. And when it comes to love, such questions can cause profound changes in our inner world. What kind of love does a person attract into their life? What aspects of their personality are reflected in their romantic preferences? Are they really making choices based on their true essence, or are their decisions dictated by emotional wounds? These questions may be uncomfortable, but they open the way to liberation. As part of this study, we have journeyed into the innermost corners of the human soul, where insecurity, unspoken desires, and projections lurk. Jung urged us not to avoid meeting the shadow, but to integrate it into our personality. This implies accepting the fact that the love we attract is not always beautiful and perfect. However, it invariably becomes a mirror, reflecting our own qualities that we may have forgotten or been afraid to see. The most striking thing is that sincere contemplation of this image can cause deep changes in the human soul. A process of self-knowledge begins, and the need to meet other people's expectations disappears. The individual is no longer willing to sacrifice themselves for others because they realize that love is not reckless sacrifice, not a desire for salvation, and not a source of constant torment. True love is a conscious attitude, full presence, and emotional maturity that arises only when a person puts themselves first. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the process of becoming who you really are, not who you should be or who you have learned to be in order to survive. It is the transformation into who you are destined to be, freed from the shackles of fear. Love is an integral part of this path because it is impossible to know your soul without sharing it with others. You cannot comprehend your shadow side without allowing another to reflect it, and you cannot change your story without allowing yourself to feel, make mistakes, and start over. From a young age, many people's minds are instilled with a distorted view of love, presenting it as a form of imprisonment. Love is mistakenly associated with self-sacrifice, suppressing one's own voice and endless patience, while suffering is passed off as an integral part of love relationships. However, when a person begins to consciously perceive love, their view of it changes dramatically. It becomes clear that true love does not require dissolving into another person, but, on the contrary, promotes self-knowledge and personal growth. Love is not an attempt to fill an inner void, but a desire to share one's inner harmony and fullness with another. To love is not to control a partner, but to respect their individuality and right to be themselves. When a person comes to this understanding, their environment also changes, as the external world begins to reflect the internal balance of the personality. But what happens when a person has not yet achieved this harmony and continues to attract relationships that bring pain and devastation? It is important to understand that this is also part of the path. Such situations should not be perceived as a personal defeat, but rather as a valuable lesson and stimulus for awakening. Each such experience has a specific function: to push a person to a deeper understanding of themselves, to identify unhealed emotional wounds, and to realize that they are still expecting from others what they can only give themselves. And although this process may seem painful and repetitive, it has tremendous transformative potential. Sometimes, in order to comprehend the true value of deserved love, it is necessary to go through the trial of unworthy love. This experience is by no means a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it testifies to human nature, as no one is born with an innate ability to love consciously. Each of our life paths is marked by wounds, and no one is immune to mistaking attachment for genuine feeling, need for selfless giving, and silence for harmony. However, when a person decides to look at the situation with an open heart and honesty, when they stop blaming others and take responsibility for their own actions, an inevitable transformation occurs. It is this transformation that grants liberation from the shackles of the past. This text is not a magic formula capable of providing answers to all questions, but if there is one thing to remember, it is that the love we attract into our lives is an invitation to self-analysis, not a punishment. It is a chance to look within ourselves and understand that what we seek most, to be loved, understood, and valued, begins with the decision to give it to ourselves first. It is from this moment of inner harmony and integrity that a person begins to attract healthier, more conscious, and sincere relationships into their life. Self-knowledge is a never-ending path where each discovery of oneself is followed by a new deepening. Each integrated emotion opens horizons for accepting new aspects of personality. It is a journey where one must embrace countless versions of oneself. Every step towards oneself is a step towards genuine love, far from idealized notions. This is love in which there is room for calm breathing, where one can be oneself without fear and masks, without having to prove anything. Such love does not make demands, but but provides support. It does not destroy, but creates. In moments of doubt, when it seems that achieving this goal is impossible, it is important to remember that the process has already begun. The very desire to look within oneself, to ask questions, and to seek answers in the depths of one's soul is already a step forward. The path has already begun, and no one is alone on this journey. Millions of people around the world are in the same process. They stumble, get up, and start over. And in this, too, love is manifested in the ability to recognize oneself in another person, even if their experiences are not fully understood, even if it hurts.